there is definitely a rule in sports across America that if you want to make a political statement that's to the left of center, that's fine. If you want to make a political statement that's to the right of center, that's not so fine.
I believe it was the New York Times back in 2020 that labeled the WNBA the most socially progressive pro league.
If I'm playing in a league and I know that more eyeballs means more money,
Yeah.
why would I have anything bad to say about a rising star?
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey there.
Today, our topic is women's sports in America. There's a few things under that umbrella we're going to talk about, but the Olympics are coming up, so we thought it would be a good time to talk about this.
Amongst other things.
Amongst other things, yes. So the big name in women's sports in America at the moment is Caitlin Clark.
Yes, superstar.
Hockey player.
Wait, what?
Just to be clear, Caitlin Clark plays women's NBA basketball.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
WNBA.
WNBA. And she has been driving record numbers of viewers, and she was the number one draft pick for this year. And she's just really the first kind of breakout star the WNBA's had that I know of. And of course, I guess one interesting thing is that she's, unlike a lot of WNBA players, she is white and she is straight, or at least she has not made her sexuality public if she's not straight. And most WNBA players are black and lesbian. That's just statistically the facts right now.
Yeah.
And so that has led to some drama. Of course it has, because that's the way the world works today.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I believe it was the New York Times back in 2020 that labeled the WNBA the most socially progressive pro league.
Why was that?
AKA the wokest league.
The wokest league.
Yeah. Isn't
Because
that a
of
great
its
title?
Advocacy. I know.
That's going to sell a lot of tickets.
That's why I go
it's-
watch sports.
It's
for women's.
advocacy for leftist causes is the best way to put that. I mean, they were fully on board BLM when, after George Floyd.
And you told us a story about Kelly Loeffler, who owned an WNBA team at one time, right?
Yes, it was the Atlanta franchise. And she was, at that time, I guess, temporary, if you put it
She
that
was
way.
the interim senator.
Interim senator for the state. And she was running for Senate in 2020.
Against Raphael Warnock.
And her team decided that they did not like her and wore a bunch of jerseys saying "Vote Warnock," or T-shirts warm up before a game. So I mean, they were making their voice heard in a very political fashion. Which, if it was other political voice and you were a pro team, you could be told that you wouldn't be playing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is definitely a rule in sports across America that if you want to make a political statement that's to the left of center, that's fine. If you want to make a political statement that's to the right of center, that's not so fine. We talked recently about Harrison Butker, who got a lot of flack for his statements at a private event speaking to Catholics. He didn't lose his job, so that's good. That's a win.
Yeah.
But it was not the right kind of political statement, so he got in trouble for it.
So, I mean, I think the narrative surrounding Caitlin Clark here is, there's been a lot of questions of why has it been so controversial? Her play hasn't been controversial.
Right.
Nobody's questioning how good of a player she is.
What I've been hearing is she plays a lot like the current, I guess, meta for the regular NBA. So she's doing a lot of 3-pointers, which is what's really popular in the NBA at the
she's
moment.
quite the scorer from downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it has, there's people swirling around the idea, is there a racism element to this?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true. Is there kind of I think there's all kinds of talk around it.
Yeah.
Is her being so popular and not being the stereotypical player of the current WNBA, and that she's such a star, is there a jealousy component, a resentment component? We should be big. Now, this is a league that has yet to turn a profit.
Right.
And
it's almost 30 years of history.
Yeah, its first season was 97.
Mm-hmm.
It relies on the NBA to supplement its revenue. So I think the NBA gives it 10 to 15 million a year.
So it's literally subsidized by a successful franchise.
And maybe before we continue on, we'll go back to the history of women's sports. We didn't do too much research on this, but I know that America is one of the like premier women's sports countries in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
In terms of actually investing in sports leagues for women. And that's part of why the U.S. women's soccer team was so dominant worldwide for such a long time, and they still are.
I think that's also why you hear stories, particularly from the NBA or WNBA, part of the reason why we had a player in Russia over there trying to make more money abroad, but it's not because, well, yeah, maybe you can't make as much money here playing women's sports as elsewhere, but it's because it's so unique and niche in other places, even more so than America, that they go to other places to make more money.
Well, yeah. And I think generally once you're a big athlete, you probably do a lot of globetrotting anyhow.
Yeah, there can be. I mean, the leagues are popular, I think, in Russia, at least the women's leagues, both women and men's, but in Russia and a few in Europe in general, there's several, but also China. China's another place where basketball is very popular.
Yeah.
And so you'll have...
and Spain, I know. I actually know several people or a couple people in the past years who've married Spanish basketball players.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a globally growing sport, and its popularity is growing.
And it's because of investing in it here in America.
Yes. I mean,
it's one of the American sports, basketball for sure. I think the actual inventor was a Canadian professor, but it's an American sport.
Yeah.
Sorry, Canadians.
I think that due to the fact that the WNBA, I think what its base salary right now for a player that's been there, for a base player, level player, is about $57,000, I think. You compare that to the NBA, and it's about $1 million for the base salary.
Yes. Now Clark has come in at a higher base.
Yeah, she was the number 1 draft, so she's going to come in at higher.
Yeah, because she was a big star in college basketball,
and
as well.
She'll make actually more revenue in her advertisements and other, endorsements. She'll make more revenue than her base salary.
I mean, I think that's where a lot of Michael Jordan's money.
Yeah. Well, she has a Nike contract, I think.
There you go.
Anyway, sports is the ultimate meritocracy.
It is, and it's a lifetime of meritocracy where you have to prove, in elementary school you're good at it, in middle school you're good at it, in high school, in college you have to do it your whole life.
Yep. Yeah. You know what else is meritocracy?
What?
The number of podcast episodes that have been produced. And this is number 50.
The big 50
for the Pop Culture Contrarians. So congratulations.
Yeah.
We have been talking to the masses for 50 episodes and hope you guys are loving it.
You've had a chance to kind of get inside our minds, know what we think about things. Hopefully you don't think we're, the worst bigots ever. We're trying, but we're not there yet.
It's just you, Sterling.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
50.
Big 50, that's a big number. And we're hoping for 50 more.
Yeah.
And, who knows, coming down the pike, we may eventually start launching some alternative podcasts with different focuses.
It's in the works. What do you guys want to hear about?
Yeah.
Let us know.
Or apparently so many players are upset with her presence because she's putting a bright spotlight on the league that needs, if it's ever going to be ultimately self-sustaining and not having to rely on the NBA to foot the bills for it, it needs to have higher viewership numbers and grow in popularity.
And it needs to have high profile players.
And to do that, you have to have players that people want to see play.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments has been that it has nothing to do with her ability, but just the fact that she is not the majority of the league. So she's not a black woman.
Yeah. So I came across this article from the AP, which is the Associated Press. It's supposed to be like the gold standard, basically, for the most neutral news source in America. It's not, but that's what it's like supposed to be. That's what it was once upon a time, allegedly. But I came across this article about Caitlin Clark and the WNBA are getting a lot of attention. It's about far more than basketball. And as you're reading through the article, it presents a lot of facts about Caitlin and about the league and talks about how it's become a political fight about the WNBA. Which it kind of has. That's the way things go. But this article goes out to mention that Clark's merits as a player are beyond doubt. She's incredibly talented. But then it says, the line that made me laugh is, in some corners of the internet and among some of the predominantly male sports punditocracy, Clark is being talked about as if she is the reason the almost 30-year-old WNBA is finally interesting enough to watch. And that's true. Like, I heard about Caitlin Clark as a college player before there was any kind of political fervor around this. And I don't know anything about women's basketball, but I knew about Caitlin Clark because she's a star.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, does anybody else in the league have the stats that she has?
I'm sure that
there's other good players.
Yeah, there's probably a history of throughout this. I mean, the league's been in existence, like I said, about 30 years. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's been players that if you were a fan of that league, you'd probably immediately recognize. Mm-hmm. The problem is the struggle is to get a player to transcend just the immediate culture of that.
Right, to be a breakout star.
Right, to be a breakout star. Like Michael Jordan, you didn't have to watch a single NBA game and you knew who Michael Jordan was.
Yeah, I was too young to really watch his career because I was, 97, I think, was towards the end of his career, and I was 3 years old. But I just knew who Michael Jordan was, and I knew he was the greatest basketball player of all time. No one ever had to tell me that.
Like LeBron James, there's another one. You can throw out a name and everybody knows it. Because the sport is big enough and they transcend even the sport. So is Caitlin Clark on her way to be that? Potentially. I mean, but for the league to gain ultimate viability, you could say, to sustain itself. Because, I mean, that's the first step. Here we are, almost 30 years, and it has yet to sustain itself.
Yeah.
I mean, and they want to complain about a gender pay gap or something like this, like when they compare the base salaries. Yeah, there's a big pay gap. There's a big pay gap there. But the pay gap is because of revenue that is generated by the leagues themselves.
Yeah. Just about every NBA game fills stadiums. And that's not true of WNBA.
Yeah. And it might be getting truer.
Yeah.
But the reality is you basic economics, basic free market capitalism. If the product you're selling isn't selling, if another company's product sells better than the product you're selling, they're going to make more money than you.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me like if I'm playing in a league and I know that more eyeballs means more money.
Mm. Yeah.
Why would I have anything bad to say about a rising star?
Yeah.
Because it's not you.
Well, who cares? Because the rising star is going to rise all ships. You're going to make more money.
True.
I will say, as far as at least the articles I've seen, I haven't seen any of Caitlin Clark's fellow players trash talking her, which is good. You'd hope not, because you're all playing together. If you're on the same team, you're on the same team. But even if you're in the same league, I feel like you should have some kind of camaraderie.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the controversy is there have been other players, not on her team, but on other teams.
That put her on blast for stuff that she has nothing to do with.
Right.
Okay. Well, in this article, the people who are quoted are associate professors of African-American studies at TCU and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, well, of course you're angry about this. That's your job.
Well, I mean, it's kind of this idea of the racial angle is this is a black sport and a white girl's coming into a black sport and she's the most popular in the sport.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was Connecticut Sun's Dejonia. I'm probably mispronouncing that.
Yeah.
Apologies. Carrington. And she put Caitlin on blast, quote, how one cannot be bothered by their name being used to justify racism, bigotry, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, and the intersectionalities of them is all nuts, she said, adding, we all have a platform, we all have a voice, and they all hold weight. Silence is a luxury.
So, of course, every time the left says those words, you can just tune out because it has no meaning because they've overused these words. But racism, homophobia, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I can see that since most of the other players are black lesbians. Xenophobia, that's fear of non-Americans. What does this have to do at all with that? What does Caitlin Clark have to do with that at all? That's just,
they
don't even have to make sense when they're throwing these accusations.
What I think she was basically saying is she's condemning Clark for Clark's kind of take in entering the league. Clark basically made her point being, I'm a basketball player and I'm focusing on playing basketball, period. Yeah. And I think that in a league, like I said earlier, that's been dubbed like the most progressive pro league.
Yeah.
that means that they have this attitude that you need to use your voice for this political agenda as a player. And if you're unwilling to do that, then you're
contributing to
part of the problem.
So you have to be anti-racist, or put it the way they did in 2020, silence is violence.
Exactly. And I think that's where that attitude is stemming from. Now, that just may be an excuse to justify not liking her, and her real motive is something entirely different.
Yeah.
Well, Clark herself said, people can talk about whatever they want. I'm here to talk about basketball. I'm here to play basketball.
That's the right attitude for a professional athlete of any flavor.
Yeah.
I'm here for the sport that I'm world class at, and I'm going to focus on being world class at that sport.
Right. And there's another problem here with the notion of politicizing the sport itself. You're not going to win greater viewership if you side with one side of the political spectrum and say, this is what we're about, and this is who we're catering our message to, and this is what we're going to speak at. Okay, well, then what you're basically saying is we don't want anybody from a political perspective that doesn't agree with our position to watch our sport. And so you're automatically basically throwing out a potentially half the fan base that you could otherwise have earned if you'd gone into it and just said, hey, the sport that we play is women's basketball, and we want anybody and everybody to come and watch because we think it's great.
And on that topic of kind of selling the sport, the Olympic team for women's basketball was just announced very recently, and Caitlin did not make the team.
Yeah.
She is a rookie, so maybe there's some explanation there, but she's also easily the highest profile player. So why wouldn't she be on there? Especially when you consider who the next highest profile player is. The only other WNBA player I can name off the top of my head is Brittany Griner, who's famous for getting arrested in Russia for bringing weed into Russia.
Yeah, that's who I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, which she knew was illegal. And then she was imprisoned in Russia, which that's bad. I don't want any American imprisoned in Russia. But the way we got her back was we traded Victor Bout, who's known as the Merchant of Death. There's a movie about him played by Nicolas Cage where he's going around selling weapons to terrorists.
Yep.
And that's what this guy actually did. And that's who he is. And we had to trade a guy who sells weapons to terrorists and ensures that terrorists have the weapons they want for a WNBA player who,
made a stupid decision
to break the law that she knew was breaking the law. So now you're getting away from that publicity finally to an actual good player. So it just seems ungrateful not to basically thank her, and to do anything but thanking her seems ungrateful to me.
Yeah.
Well, it's because she's white.
Well, I mean, I think that maybe that's an element to it. I'm always a little hesitant to throw around that there's definitely racism here. I do think there's an element of that amongst some people. But I think the bigger component, honestly, is jealousy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's when somebody comes in, especially when they're new and they're better than you.
Yeah.
There's either two ways you respond to that. Either you recognize it with humility and say, man, it's going to be fun playing with this person and just looking at their skill or whatever you're doing. And maybe it's in work or something like that. Or there's going to be a resentment and an attempt to bring them down. And mostly what I feel like we've seen initially, and there's been a bit of both, but it seems like mostly it's been this kind of reaction that's negative, bring her down. But so far, she seems to have, as a player, taken the steps that a very mature player does, which is rise above the fray, let your game do the talking. And the longer she does that, the more fans she's actually going to earn beyond what she already has. She's playing smart ball. She's playing smart little word or little p politics in the field in which he's doing it wisely by saying, I'm not going to do anything intentionally to try to alienate people or give a reason for people to question who I am as a person.
Yeah. So that's some of the difference, because we hear, especially thinking of the women's national soccer team with Megan, how do you say her last name?
Rapinoe.
Megan Rapinoe.
Yeah.
Who was very much a whiner from what I remember of the comments she publicly made. She was a big old whiner about how it's sexist and all that stuff, why she doesn't get as much as the men.
Well, to be fair, her whining had nothing to do with her when she was on the pitch. No, she was in her prime a very good player.
Yes, that's true.
And a very fun player to watch. The sad thing was she embraced this false narrative of unfairness in regards to the pay that the two leagues within the women's soccer and women's soccer.
Yeah.
And this false narrative, somehow the women were being mistreated or unfairly compensated by the deals that they signed within the two leagues.
Yeah. Even though I believe statistically they made a greater percentage of the total value of the women's national team as salary than the men do.
With better security and benefits.
Yeah.
They each had a chance, and they each had a chance to sign their own agreements collectively as players. The men had their choice and voted on what they wanted. The women had their choice and voted on what they wanted.
They were offered the same kinds of deals too. Both were.
Yeah. And the women's revenue, this is just the reality of it. Men's sports generates far more revenue than women's sports, generally speaking. I think the only sport maybe that is pretty comparable, maybe tennis.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's probably accurate. Although I would speculate, because I know that Djokovic is the great tennis player at the moment, right?
He's one of them. Yeah.
I would speculate that he's probably bigger than the Williams sisters. But that's just speculation. I don't know.
I don't know. My impression is Williams' sister. I mean, they are super famous.
Serena is like the most famous.
And that's another example of a star player.
Yeah.
But women's and men's tennis has been for a long time pretty comparable when it comes to star power for each side for a long time. And, being a sports fan myself, I've watched almost any sport I'll sit down and watch. And I think the reason, you can enjoy watching both men's and women's tennis are kind of for two different reasons, but they're both, you're watching amazing athletes in the sport. And I understand why, generally speaking, when you look at an NBA game and the level of athleticism that the athletes show there versus the WNBA, is quite a step down as far as the type.
I think
rarely will you see a dunk in women's sports.
Right. And
rarely.
And there's barely a game in the men's league where there's not a dunk.
Oh yeah. I don't know.
Maybe none at all. I don't know.
Multiple dunks.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of dunks, why don't you go over and dunk that subscribe button? And
is that how we do it now? We dunk it.
Yeah.
Make sure that you hit the star, send us a review, or write us a review, depending on if you're listening on a podcast platform or if you're on YouTube watching us. Do the thing on the platform.
Leave us some comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us where we're being stupid, whatever.
Yeah, we'd love to hear more from you and help us grow the podcast. Share it with your friends.
Yeah.
Are you a sports fan?
As a kid, I was not terribly. I have recently started paying a lot more attention to various sports, but mainly my biggest interest is in college football.
Okay.
But I've started paying more attention to all sorts of sports leagues in the past couple of years.
What about you, Andrew?
I like sports pretty well, but I really like IndyCar.
Oh, interesting.
Nice.
Which
that is kind of unusual for this neck of the woods.
Yeah, it is. I've got some family ties as far as fans are concerned, influence in that realm, but I like racing sports.
Okay.
I like football.
Do you follow F1?
Not as much as IndyCar, but I do have friends who do.
Okay.
F1 is the one where there's such a dominant player at the moment, or racer at the moment, right?
Yeah, F1's interesting. Yeah, Verstappen. He's either in the midst of his third or fourth championship season in a row. But F1 has an interesting thing where it goes through these stretches where there's one dude often who just dominates for years.
And a lot of that has to do with the car they're driving, where they're just driving such a quality car.
The equipment has to be peak, but there's also, you just have to have a driver who just kind of has it.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. But
so
we're getting off course
here. Back to women's sports in America.
Yes.
So I made the point about Megan Rapinoe being kind of a whiner. Megan Rapinoe, sorry.
Yeah.
But Caitlin Clark's comments not one has been whining. They've all been very classy. When she was asked about not making the Olympic team, she said, it gives me something to work for.
Yeah.
That's the right attitude if you want to be really good at a sport. Yeah. But, sometimes there are actual things to complain about. And that gets me to the next person, which is Riley Gaines, who is famous for being a swimmer who competed against someone who was unfairly in her league, a man who now goes by the name Leah Thomas. And so Riley Gaines was competing with this guy, and she had to be in locker rooms with this guy where everyone's changing, and he is a man in all respects of the word. And so she's been now, for the past couple of years, very strongly campaigning against that kind of thing and explaining, like, you can listen to interviews with her, and it's kind of heartbreaking because these girls, high school girls, lots of time, college girls, get intimidated into not saying anything and pretending they're comfortable with having a guy in the changing room with them, which they aren't, but they have to say they are, or else they're bigots. And so, Riley Gaines is doing a great job here. And you're told that men don't win women's sports when they transition. The men don't transition and then become the wild successes, but pay attention and you'll see at least once a month, you'll see track race, dude finishes 10 seconds ahead of all the girls in the race, things like that. So that's just,
yeah. I mean, so we were talking about how Megan Rapinoe was complaining about the supposed gender pay gap, or that there is a gender pay gap, but that the gender pay gap was somehow unfair.
Right. And we have proof that it's not.
What Riley Gaines is complaining about is genuine unfairness.
Yeah.
When you're allowing males into female sports who, claim that they're not male, which is they're lying, and then competing against women, and everyone has to play the emperor's new clothes and, act like, no, this is totally legit.
Yeah. As
these guys dominate these sports, it's unfair. That is truly unfair to the women.
And if you want physical proof, just we've been talking about the NBA. As we said just a minute ago, in the NBA, people dunk all the time. Dunking is extremely common. In the WNBA, it's extremely rare. Yeah. It almost never happens. Yeah. And that's because men are taller and they are better able to do all the physical athleticism necessary to be able to do a dunk. And they have bigger hands, all those things that are necessary for dunking.
Right. So if you're going to protect a women's sport, you have to ensure that only women are playing the sport.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That was the point of Title IX, and it's been completely obliterated under Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But the Olympics are coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. Are they going to be allowing men to swim in the women's?
I forgot how.
I haven't heard about that.
I'm not sure
what all going to be.
Okay. So is it? But what about the different?
Leah Thomas tried, I think.
What about the different? Is that just the U.S. Olympic Committee, or is that the International Olympic Committee?
I think the U.S. took that petition
from the internet
to the international.
And, international shut it down.
Yes.
Okay. Is that across the board for all the Olympic sports?
I only read about it from the swimming perspective.
Okay,
I would expect that is likely going to be across the board.
I'm pulling this up right now. I'm pretty sure that New Zealand has qualified man for women's weightlifting for the Olympics.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, talk about some record breakers right there. Weightlifting.
So in 2021, New Zealand sent a man to compete in women's weightlifting.
I don't know if it's actually happening this year, though.
Yeah. Yeah, because 2021 was the holdover Olympics that got canceled.
That's true. And it is kind of interesting because this issue, especially Europe, is starting to, the perspective on this is starting to change.
Oh, yeah. There's prominent British politicians who are saying, this was a huge mistake now.
Yeah. Which is good. Talk about Johnny come lately, but it needs to happen. We need to stand up and say enough of this insanity, this nonsense.
Yeah, we have to say men and women are different.
Biological reality is reality. The only reason any of us are here is because of biological reality of the sexes, the binary nature of sex. We have to stand on that truth and not budge just because someone's feelings are messed up and they feel that there's something that they're not.
And that's a bigger point, that don't budge because someone's feelings are upset. If they have a genuine complaint, then listen, hear them out.
Right.
But if they're just complaining because, unfortunately, too many Americans have been encouraged to find things to complain about, then tune them out. Tell them to shut up.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've gotten really bad at that. And that's how you end up with men swimming with women.
We've replaced kindness with niceness.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
There's a difference. I mean, yeah. So anyway, I think that, Riley Gaines, legitimate beef.
Yeah, exactly.
Megan Rapinoe, illegitimate beef.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with actual facts and truth, in both cases. Because the way a system works, if you're running a business or if you have an athletic team, you make money when you sell the tickets and people come and watch. If you don't sell as much tickets as the other team, guess what? You're not making as much money as the other team. Ergo, you can't pay your players as much as the other team.
Right. And that's any hate vitriol directed towards Caitlin Clark is also misplaced.
Yeah.
Because if she gets more eyes on the WNBA, more people watch more games, everyone's going to make more money. Well, I think that's a pretty good note to end on. This has been our topic about our episode about women's sports in America. Mostly we talked about Caitlin Clark, but we swung in Brittany Griner and Riley Gaines and Megan Rapinoe and soccer, tennis, basketball.
The Olympics.
This is just a question. We can cut this out. Is there a women's a baseball team like league?
No, it's usually softball.
Softball. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. That's what I was forgetting.
I mean, there was back in World War II, they had the
they did
the women's leagues.
because those were some tough ladies.
Okay. All right.
That's where there's that famous line. There's no crying in baseball.
Yeah, there's the movie A
League of Their Own.
Yeah. Great movie, by the way.
Yeah. I need to watch that one. Yeah. All right. Well, that's our episode. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe both to the Patriot Post and the Pop Culture Contrarian. See you next time.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.